malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Pozdrav dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Današnja tema je klimatske promjene, odnosno ono što nazivaju klimatskim promjenama ili klimatski službeni narativ i ono sve što mi kao posljedica tog narativa danas i plaćamo, naravno zove se zelena tranzicija. Danas je moj gost netko tko uistinu jako dugo se bavi tom temom, ima što za reći i ima za reći ono što se vrlo rijetko može čuti u današnjim mainstream krugovima. Ali da ne gubimo vrijeme, krenimo i ugostimo dragog gosta, profesora Richarda Lindzena. Hello, professor. Welcome to our show in Croatia.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
It's a pleasure. Can you say a few words about your background?
Well, yeah. I got my doctorate in 1964 in applied math, but the problem I worked on was the interaction of radiation and dynamics and chemistry in the stratosphere. And I found working in atmospheric sciences interesting for a variety of reasons. The main one was there were a lot of good problems. The second was it was largely classical physics, and I felt that more comfortable personally. It was a relatively unexplored area. It's a small area. Strange though it may seem, the UN may speak of thousands of the world's leading climate scientists, but in fact, when the issue began, there were maybe 6 departments in America that had any effort at all. So I started work as a postdoctoral fellow in Norway and in Seattle. And then I took a job with the National Center for Atmospheric Research as a research scientist in meteorology. And shortly thereafter, in 1967-68, I got an offer of a tenure position at the University of Chicago. I stayed there for several years and received an appointment at Harvard University, where as a professor for another 10 years. And then a close colleague of mine, Jules Charny, who was the leading figure at MIT, died, and they offered me his chair. And so I moved to MIT, where I was for 35 years before retiring in 2013. I've been elected to the National Academy of Sciences, in addition to professorships at the main universities. I worked on a variety of problems on the stability of the atmosphere, heat transport. But primarily, early in my career, the 2 things I did was provide what is still the explanation for what's called the quasi-biennial oscillation. Turns out the wind above the tropics turns around every other year with a rough period of 26 months. And we provided an explanation for that I think is still correct. And there was also a classical issue in atmospheric tidal theory, which I helped explain, dating back to Kelvin's time. In the interim, we've looked at various problems, the stability of the atmosphere, how transport occurs, and so on. And climate is, of course, part of that. At any rate, I could go on, but I think it gets pretty boring at some stage.
It's very important that you have so many experience because this is very important topic, and we have in Europe this green transition, and Croatia is following. We even have a ministry for decarbonization. And you investigate lots of what is the role of CO2 in the atmosphere, but we'll come to this. Can you tell us why you think that this popular narrative is not accurate?
Well, let's start with one of the obvious things. You have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And every 6 years or so, they issue these large reports. The interesting thing is these large reports never claim that you have an existential threat. On the other hand, they have policymakers' summaries, which tilt things differently from the science report. So even the UN doesn't agree with the extreme statements about CO2. But more to the point, I mean, one just has to look at the data. None of the trillions of dollars expended on controlling CO2 has made the least difference to its rate of increase. So, all these sacrifices people are making is for nothing. On top of that, the picture of climate based on the greenhouse is applicable only to the tropics. And the reason people were attracted to that, who are opposed to the issue, is even there they had crazy assumptions about positive feedbacks and so on. So, you immediately were trying to point that out. But the truth is that model was created in the early 20th century, I think by a man called Schwarzschild. And its purpose was not to explain the Earth's climate variations, but rather the difference in climate between different planets. And so for that, it's adequate. But for instance, when Al Gore shows his picture of the episodic ice ages over the last 700,000 years, and he shows that, CO2 is going along with the temperature and so on, anyone looking at it can realize there's something funny about that. The CO2 is following, not leading. And so, from the beginning, there should have been red flags saying there's something crazy about this issue. And instead, politicians just loved it.
Well, yes, it seems that there is a more policy than science in this, and they are telling all the time that science is settled. What is your opinion? What is really settled, and what are the open questions?
Well, yeah, science is never settled, first of all. So the statement itself means people are lying. And why are they lying? Because they know the public does not really, for the most part, follow science. And so they're trying to tell people, don't you worry about it. All scientists agree, just go along. This is not honest. It's an indication there's something terrible happening. And, I've seen this. I mean, for instance, there's not only a control about CO2, a concern, there's a concern about methane, right?
Mm-hmm.
They say each molecule of methane is more important than a molecule of CO2. But there are very many fewer molecules of methane, so it's negligible. Nevertheless, you go to Ireland, you go to other places, and they're going to kill half their cattle because of methane. This will go down in history as like the witch hunts of the 17th century or anything like that. Just a period of absolute insanity.
Yeah, maybe I can here mention that I read just yesterday that there is one political party in Denmark, and they are forbid to older people to eat meat more than one piece per week because they are responsible for climate changes.
Now, I mean, the changes, first of all, in a normal science, if people make predictions and one after another fail, there's usually doubt. In this issue, the more it fails, the more certain it becomes. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's so bizarre, and yet I have the feeling it must touch some psychological nerve. That people feel that this is a way to show they're virtuous or something.
Yeah.
For politicians, it gives them power over life itself. So, it has all sorts of nasty features. My hope is, I realize in Europe, it's much more popular than in the States. In the States, it's become a partisan issue. So the Republicans, by and large, regard it as nonsense. The Democrats feel it's really important. But at least it means over half the country doesn't accept it. In Europe, I have the feeling the pressures are much greater for everyone to accept it and salute it and so on. And this is sort of tragic.
Yeah, that became some kind of ideology in Europe, and they are organizing our life about climate policies. Let's come back to carbon dioxide. We presently have now around 420 ppm. And what if carbon went to double, for example, 800 ppm? How much will temperature increase in atmosphere?
You know, every doubling does the same amount. So going from 280 to 560 gives you a certain amount of warming. Going from 560 to 1120 gives you the same. Even from there, going to 22, something or other, gives you the same. It does less and less each molecule. So, but you know, there's no likelihood it'll ever go that high. And even if it does very little. I mean, we're expecting roughly a doubling of CO2 to give you about a half degree warming. You know, people should wake up and realize a half degree warming they deal with every day between, breakfast and 10 o'clock. So, you know, it's not terrible. And it's largely just in the tropics. And, you know, it's just a scare technique to, you know, Manabe and Weatherall, two scientists in the 70s, made an assumption. They said, let us assume that if you add CO2, the relative humidity remains constant. And then they found out that that would mean that water vapor would go up. Water vapor is a much more significant greenhouse gas, and that would amplify what CO2 does by a factor of 2. So that would bring you to over 1 degree. And this gave hope to people who wanted to push this issue. They then began claiming all sorts of things might be positive feedbacks. They were still talking about 1 or 2 degrees. And I don't personally understand how they got away with this, in the sense that why would people panic over 1 to 2 degrees? And the only reason I can think of is they say, well, you had massive ice ages and you had warm periods in climate, but those involved changes that were much bigger than that. They said, well, whatever happens in the tropics gets amplified at the poles. But if you look at the data, these are 2 distinct things. The tropics do not determine what happens at the poles. What determines at the poles is what is the transport between what's called the boundary of the Hadley cell around 30 degrees latitude and the pole. And that's a hydrodynamic issue. So, I don't know what to say, in a sense. I mean, the issue made no sense. It was purely political. It was, the environmental movement changed in 70. It focused on the energy sector. You may recall that initially they were arguing for global cooling. And, then when it stopped cooling in the 70s, they started looking at forest dieback in Germany. And when the forests recovered, they went to CO2 and warming. It wasn't a matter that CO2 was the issue. It was they wanted to get the energy sector. And in my opinion, the reason they wanted the energy sector is it involves trillions of dollars, if you can overturn it.
Yeah, and we coming to the most important question, how much is anthropogenic CO2 involved in this increasement of greenhouse gases?
Well, it has a slight effect in the tropics, where it's already quite warm, and where the slight effect would hardly be noticed. CO2 is not a pacemaker for climate. As we see from the ice ages, it is a consequence of climate change, not a cause.
Yeah, there is a difference between increasement of temperature and then huge log. After that is coming increasement of CO2. And also it depends how long period you're looking at. Because if you look at a shorter period, you can have maybe a section that's different. But when you look on long-term period, it's CO2 rises after rise of temperature.
Oh yeah, no, it's a small effect. It's not irrelevant, but the notion that it dominates climate and all climate change is a response to CO2 is just not true.
Okay, what is your theory? What has the biggest impact on changing in weather or in climate on our Earth?
Well, okay. First of all, if you look at textbooks before this issue, what you see is when they discuss climate, they speak about the distribution of different climates throughout the Earth. And everyone knows this. I mean, you go from place to place, they have different climates. What is usually not stressed but obvious, they vary independent of each other. So the notion that climate on Earth marches in lockstep with CO2 every place is simply not true. What does the World Meteorological Organization define climate as? Well, they arbitrarily define it as time changes on time scales of 30 years or longer. It's somewhat arbitrary, but let's go with it. If you look at that, what you see is if you took every station and looked for only timescale variations that are 30 years or longer, the stations do not go together. Every little region has its own climate cycles. The notion that the Earth is one body and it goes with one variable, CO2, and climate changes uniformly simply doesn't stand up to any observation. So, it's an issue which unfortunately depends crucially on not only popular ignorance, but popular indifference to information. People don't check. It even goes to for instance, what do you mean by the temperature of the Earth? Let me ask you a question.
Yeah, temperature of the Earth atmosphere is different completely. We have summer, we have winter.
No, but you hear in climate studies, the Earth is getting warmer. What are they referring to?
I think they are referring from 1850.
How do you measure it? What is it?
But they have station, they measure in the station and they measure it from satellites.
And the satellites for the moment.
And they measure it 2 meters above the ground.
You want it the whole Earth. How do you measure that?
I believe average.
Average Mount Everest with the Dead Sea?
Of course.
No, that is not what they use, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
What they use is they take each station, and it's a rather peculiar choice, but at least it makes more sense.
Yeah.
At each station, they look for 30-year average.
Yeah.
And they look for the deviation from a 30-year average at each station and average that.
Yeah, and they need to calculate this urban heating effect because...
No, let me finish a little.
Sorry.
If you look at a picture of it, you notice they show you a picture of it increasing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do they ever show you the data points?
No. So I read some how they calculate it. That's a different way they collect these temperatures, but it's completely different. Depends.
What do you think they'd look like?
This temperature, they call it hockey stick.
No. They show you a picture of the temperature increasing on the order of a degree over 150 years.
Mm-hmm.
If they showed you the data points that were averaged to produce this, they go over 20 degrees. and they're dense. So on that picture, that curve that looks like it's tilting up is tilting up very little. And at any given point, almost as many stations are cooling as warming. But they don't show you that.
Mm-hmm.
So from the beginning, it's a dishonest presentation. Present an average without the data points is to tell the person, I'm not telling you how I got this.
Mm-hmm. And as I know, urban heating effect has also impact, I think even up to 0.3 or 0.4 degree.
That's tiny compared to what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you can always find, yeah, sure, when you're talking about tiny changes like this, all sorts of things matter. But if you leave out the data points that show you almost as many stations are doing the opposite, you're really lying.
Well, they have also assessment report, and in these reports they say that will go up to 2.2 centigrade degrees, up to 5. And there is some models was saying that. What do you think? Are they realistic or they are overestimating?
How should I put it? First of all, the models are giving you numbers all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So, they're saying, take your pick.
Yeah.
And this is not how you do science.
They have 4 different models, as I understand.
Oh, many more.
Many more.
Yeah.
Well, in that case,
England alone has more than 4 models.
We need to understand more what is really happening. Are we in some kind of climate crisis? Or this is something normal, what happened already thousands and millions of years ago in this earth?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the Earth has had many changes. You have this medieval warm period, and then you have people saying, oh, we got rid of it. And I remember when this issue started, it was said, we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. This is not how you do science.
Of course. You also established one theory, exactly, they call it iris effect. Can you explain us what is iris effect?
This was while I was still sort of working on the narrative that they had presented. And the question was, the so-called feedbacks. And so I was working at NASA, consulting there, with 2 colleagues, Howe and we were looking at how clouds behave, because if you look at all these feedbacks, they're very small, and clouds give you much bigger effect than CO2, and they're variable. So we thought, well, with satellites, we'll try and see how clouds vary with surface temperature. And what we found was that when you warm, the cloud cover decreases, allowing more escape of heat, and the reverse, of course, when you cool. And this was a negative feedback, and pretty much canceled almost all of CO2. And, immediately it was interesting. When the article was published in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, you know what happened? The editor was fired immediately for allowing it to be published.
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
And then the new editor came and said, please send in all your critiques. And some of the critiques actually increased negative feedback, but since that was different from what I got, they thought that would work. I don't know. I mean, it's a crazy situation. It's hard to describe how crazy it is. But the iris effect still looks okay. And in particular, it resolves an interesting problem in climate, which is the so-called early faint sun. billions of years ago, the output of the sun was much less. We know that from the physics of the sun. And yet, the evidence is that the Earth's climate was not terribly different from today's. The oceans were not frozen over, and so on. And so the question is, what accounted for that? And people tried to say, well, maybe it was because we had a lot more CO2 and so on. None of that worked. On the other hand, the iris effect easily corrects the situation. And it is entirely sufficient to prevent the oceans from freezing over, despite a very large reduction in the solar output. And so that remains. It's again, shouldn't be necessary, because all you're dealing with is the behavior of the tropics, and you're talking about very small changes. And the changes that are associated with ice ages or the Eocene warm period are almost entirely due to extratropical heat transport.
And you call it this iris effect because of the pupil. It's acting like eye.
It's essentially changing in response to the radiation, albeit in the opposite direction in this case.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is, of course, lots of theories and scientists who are saying that the biggest impact on climate has the sun. And in these assessment reports, they are saying that sun is not that important. But some claiming that radiation from the supernova and also sun radiation and sunspots have a big influence on climate on the Earth.
I don't particularly wish to get involved in that, because just like CO2, it's people who are taking a very naive view of climate and assuming climate is one thing forcing the whole climate. Solar output, CO2, I think both make no sense. Getting back to climate change, what's occurring, for instance, if I look at station data, of course, it only goes back 100 some odd years, but you have other evidence that climate has varied locally. And what you see on relatively short periods that we do have data is different stations vary out of phase with each other. They don't vary together. And so, for instance, what could cause different places to have different climate? And I think the obvious answer, although it's not been explored a great deal, is the oceans. The surface of the Earth is not in equilibrium with space. There are ocean currents constantly exchanging heat with the surface, bringing heat to the surface, taking it away, and so on. Ocean circulations exist on timescales from Enso, El Nino, to 1,000 years. And so I would say that, if on Earth you're looking at climate change up to timescales of 1,000 years, my guess, and it's at this point just a guess, it's primarily due to the oceans. When you get to things like the ice ages, your Serbian colleague Milankovic pretty much identified what's causing that. And with the Eocene, we don't know quite why you had this warm period, but it's almost certainly due to the absence of ice and snow in high latitudes.
Yes, it's interesting that Milankovic was born in Croatia, Dalj place, and he was living in Vinkovci part of. But yes, I'm familiar with his work. Also, do you think that we are sure what is the influence of oceans in CO2 and also in warming and cooling of the atmosphere?
Oh, no, I think it's an area that still needs exploration. But we do know that because of oceans, the surface is not simply in balance with space. So, the current narrative completely ignores the ocean, and yet it violates the assumption.
And what is influence of on this sea level? Is there any rising? They say that it's very small, but it's still that sea level is rising. Is this true?
Of years. And, the main reason is, we're still recovering from the Ice Age.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about small Ice Age, what ended on 1850.
No, that's the Little Ice Age.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the one that ended, 10,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and also some people are saying that we are still in this ice age because still we didn't reach temperature what were 2,000 years ago, exactly between 1950 and 1,300.
Not sure what you're referring to, but
I'm talking about this short period of warming between 950 and 1,000.
Medieval optimum.
That's right.
I don't know how much impact that has. The main impact was the end of the large ice age about 12,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, the sea level was rising hundreds of feet, and it slowly continues a bit. But, how shall I put it? We've lived with modest increases in sea level for centuries.
Mm-hmm. That means we don't need to be worried about this.
No more worried than we are normally. You do build dikes, you do check it from time to time, and that's life.
Well, from this, from what I know and what I'm hear from you, there is a really complicated influence on climate, and we really don't understand it well, that we can confirm what are the real reason and what we can do to stop this climate change exactly. Are we even need to stop them? Maybe with the increase of this temperature, we can live better.
What we know about climate is enough to know that what we're doing with CO2 is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
For two reasons. One is obviously, and it's easy to check, all the things we've done have had no impact on the rate of increase of CO2. And we know that China and India and Russia and so on are not going to pay the least attention to it. And so whatever we do is just hurting ourselves. And so history will look at this period and say, this is a period when people in the West decided to try and commit suicide. And they'll wonder why. And I think it would be a good question because it makes no sense. On top of that, there is no evidence of any of the predictions. Remember what Gore was promising, the end of the ice, the end of the Arctic Ocean free of ice by, a few years and so on. None of that occurred. And in science, when you make prediction after prediction and one after the other fails, you're supposed to question what you're doing instead of deciding you better do more.
Yeah, we're spending money for sure, and because of it, we're becoming poorer and poorer, and for sure that could have a major impact on the quality of life than climate.
No benefit whatever.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, for somebody who is a small country like Croatia, if you have a chance to make decision about our climate policies and about our following this green transition, what would you suggest to our Prime Minister?
Forget about climate. Think about the society, what you can do to make it healthier and wealthier and happier, instead of burdening people with imaginary demons.
Yes, I understand you. I have to ask you something because it's widely spread, this question, and people are really asking, and also have some of them have huge doubts. It's geoengineering. We heard lots of trying to impact on the climate, and we even hear that they are trying to spray the sky to protect Earth from impact of sun. What do you think about this?
Stupid. Simple as that. I mean, we don't know how to do it. Conceivably, it could have some negative effect. In all likelihood, it would have almost no effect. There was, during the Gulf War, there was a fear that, we were going to create dense cloud, and that was going to create climate change there. Nothing of the sort happened. I mean, I think people are just tempted to say having fun, but in fact, they're having malicious fun.
But I saw that for example, you just mentioned states in the Gulf, they are impacting on their weather because they want to make rain, and they have done it. They have some technology. They are trying to influence on this matter.
That's been going on a long time. Cloud seeding, basically. There's very little chance that you literally make rain, but you can certainly take situations where it's going to rain and influence it a bit where it occurs and when it occurs by cloud seeding. It's okay. I don't see anything terrible about it.
You don't think that has a higher impact, or maybe impact that we don't understand yet, and maybe has some influence on our health?
I doubt it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I read this assessment report 6. I think it was published 3 years ago. And after that, United Nations still saying that we are in a warming time. Exactly, I heard Mr. Guterres who says we are boiling now. That means that they are still pushing this narrative.
Sure. And, what Gutierrez said is so different from the 6th report, okay? So extreme that it made it perfectly clear that he had no knowledge whatever of what he was saying, that he only wanted to frighten people. And when you have politicians, especially an ignorant person like Gutierrez, who just want to frighten people, you have to wonder about the organization they're heading.
Yeah, that's important because it's United Nations. United States decided to left Paris Agreement. And I read, I think it was in autumn last year, new report from United States, and it seems to that you are changing, exactly, United States is changing policies concerning climate changes.
Oh, I think, there are plenty of people in the U.S. at this stage who, despite the fact that funding agencies have been trying to force people into a certain position, are saying enough is enough. This is a silly issue. We cannot destroy our economy, our energy sector, and so on. But also the damage being done. And people are finally waking up. They don't want their land used for windmills and solar panels and so on. These are not helpful. They don't do anything. They're ugly. They kill birds. They do this. We want to return to sanity.
What it means to return to sanity?
It means stop obsessing about climate change due to CO2. Stop introducing idiocy like the windmills and the solar panels, and just aim for a healthy, prosperous society.
What is the cleanest source of energy?
Nuclear. But I mean, again, clean. For instance, today,
Yeah,
you can build an electric power plant that uses coal that is as clean virtually as natural gas. And so even coal is clean today if you're willing to spend a bit more on scrubbers and so on.
That means that this green transition in Europe is completely wrong, and we are spending money for. Yeah.
I mean, I'm watching Germany commit suicide, get rid of its industry, its manufacturing, and good old German ways. When they want to get rid of a coal plant, they destroy it completely, cement it over in case they want to change their mind. They can't. Watching it, I mean, historians will have fun with it, I hope, if it doesn't do too much damage.
For sure, I and you will be attacked for this episode because we are claiming something that official narrative is against it. And for example, if they are really strong in some science, what would be the strongest point? I'm talking about people who are pushing official narrative. What is their strongest point if they are really following the science?
You mean with CO2?
With everything, with climate, completely climate changes, they call it.
Yeah. How shall I put it? I can't think of anything involving CO2 that provides a useful insight into any aspect of climate that I know of. The only thing that gives it credibility is constant repetition. When you tell a big lie often enough, as Goebbels pointed out to the Nazis, that becomes truth. That is the way the climate narrative becomes truth.
Well, and let's imagine for the end, that's something important to say to people because I think maybe we will agree about this. In case that we really went up 2 to 3 degrees, is life on Earth will be easier or we will have more difficulties?
You know, if you went up 2 to 3 degrees in the tropics, it would have almost no impact whatever. Small is small. The only way this has any impact is if you assume whatever happens in the tropics, by some mysterious action, becomes much bigger at the poles.
Okay, can you say a last message to our audience? Because they are every day they're listening, they are reading from the newspaper about disaster, what will come because of climate. Can you send them some message as a scientist, as somebody who is investigating this more than 60 years?
Yeah, I mean, what can I say? This is a political issue. It has nothing to do with science. It is fundamentally evil. And just because it is repeated over and over again does not help make an idiotic issue true.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this interview. And I hope we'll stay. Thank you.
Croatia certainly, no matter what you think, is not going to contribute much to climate change.
For sure.
Okay. Anyway, good luck.
Thank you. Bye. You too.
Bye-bye.
Evo, dragi narode, htio sam još jedanput da razgovaramo o ovoj temi, jer kao što ste primijetili, ne prestaje propaganda iz naše Europske komisije i politika i mi i dalje plaćamo takozvane karbonske kredite, odnosno karbonska prava. Mi slijepo slijedimo, kao Europska unija sad kažem, a već sam više puta u ovoj emisiji rekao da mi ni nemamo svoju politiku, nego slijepo slijedimo politiku Europske komisije. Dakle, dalje plaćamo poreze na energiju da bi zaštitili planet koji, po ovome što tvrdi profesor, uopće ne treba zaštitu jer nije ugrožen. Nije on jedini koji to tvrdi i mnogi su bili u mojoj emisiji i objašnjavali su zašto je to tako, zašto oni misle da je to tako. Ako se pitate zašto ja pozivam ljude sa takvim mišljenjem, razlog je jednostavan, zato što ćete na mainstream medijima isključivo čuti one koji govore suprotno, koji guraju službeni narativ i koji traže od vas da skupo plaćate energiju i da plaćate karbonska prava. A to nije jedino što traže od vas da plaćate, jer kao što znamo i te klimatske politike su sastavni dio i službene europske politike i agende 2030 Ujedinjenih naroda, koja u svakoj od 17 točaka održivog razvoja uzima u obzir klimatske promjene i borbu protiv istih. Što naravno u konačnici znači da će i zakoni i način života i sve ono što vam propisuju imati na umu da radite onako kako bi zaštitili planet od tih klimatskih promjena. A što ako tih klimatske promjene su upravo ovako kao što profesor Lindzen tvrdi? To znači da mi uzaludno silne trošimo novce, da neko od toga ima dobru korist, a koristi istovremeno taj narativ kako bi nam oduzeo mnoga ljudska i građanska prava. Nemojmo zaboraviti da nam propisuju potrošnju i da sada mjere karbonski otisak. Vi znate sad da imate i kartice koja vam svaki put izmjeri koliko ste kreirali CO2 kad putujete. A kao što vidite, po tvrdnji profesora, nije uopće opasnost od CO2, baš nikakva. Također znamo da ideje i koje se implementiraju u gradu Zagrebu, takozvani 15-minutni gradovi, su implementirani kako bi sve što vam treba bilo na 15 minuta od kuće. A u stvarnosti žele da ne vozite automobile, žele da ne putujete. Blokovsko parkiranje u gradu Zagrebu je isključivo zbog toga da se ne vozite u centar grada. Dakle, žele da prestanete voziti. I sad ti famozni bajsevi naši tome služe upravo zato da što veći broj ljudi se vozi biciklom, a što manje vozi autom, da bi zaštitio planet. Kao što vidite, planet koji pitanje je da li uopće treba štititi. Ali definitivno strah od klimatskih promjena i od ugrožavanja života na zemlji će dovesti do toga da se mogu određene politike provoditi radi općeg dobra. Opet imamo opće dobro, više dobro od našeg dobra, koje nas tjera da uvodimo politike koje ograničavaju ljudska prava i slobode. Pravo na kretanje, pravo na to da jedemo što želimo, jer kao što sam spomenuo u emisiji, uistinu ima onih koji imaju ideju da smanjimo unos mesa, zato što smo krivi, mi starije generacije smo krivi što smo ugrozili ovaj planet, pa mlađe generacije danas su u problemu. Dakle, to je sve jedna, jasno vam je, politika i ponavljam još jedanput, mi u Hrvatskoj imamo ministarstvo za dekarbonizaciju i ako uzmete u ovo što je profesor rekao, onda vi shvaćate šta znači imati ministarstvo za dekarbonizaciju. Dakle, da se borimo protiv nečega što nam nije neprijatelj. Čista ideologija. Ali evo, naša službena vlada, i to ne samo politika HDZ-a, nego politika i SDP-a i Možemo, dakle svih najvećih stranaka u Hrvatskom saboru je ista. Borimo se protiv klimatskih promjena, jer nas one ugrožavaju. Stoga, evo, ako netko želi uistinu znati što je znanost, ja sam na svom profilu objavio preko 100 različitih objava u kome se objašnjavaju različiti fenomeni kroz fiziku i kroz biologiju. Jer fizika i biologija najviši su dio koji mogu objašnjavati te fenomene klimatskih promjena, koje pitanje da li su opasne i pitanje da li su štetne za čovjeka, a opet da li razumijemo kako nastaju, kao što je i sam profesor danas rekao. Možete na mom profilu vidjeti, možete vidjeti emisije koje sam imao sa profesorom Vilanom Haperom, sa Rogerom Pilkeom Jr., sa Judith Curry, sa Mark Moranom. Imao sam emisiju i sa jednim koji je s druge strane, koji smatra da smo već prešli granicu bez povratka i da će planet definitivno propasti. I on mi je dao intervju i to neposredno prije nego što je otišao u zatvor, a otišao je u zatvor jer je kao organizator Just Stop Oil, jedna najveće organizacije za borbu protiv klimatskih promjena i Extinction Rebellions, su jedan most u Velikoj Britaniji, nazovimo to tako, uništili i time su ugrozili promet i zbog toga su osuđeni, a time su htjeli protestirati da kažu kako je planet ugrožen i kako smo prešli granicu od koje više povratka nema za buduće generacije. Dakle, sve te emisije pogledajte, ispitajte, pročitajte, vidite o čemu se radi, donesite sami zaključke. Ja sam tu samo da vam pokušavam donijeti sve poglede koji mogu vam pomoći da donesete odluku sami za sebe, a da nakon toga stvorite naravno stav prema službenoj politici, jer upamtite jednu važnu stvar. Koliko god nam danas govorili da ova inflacija i rast cijena goriva ima veze sa ratom, naravno je ima i utjecaje i na burze i na rast cijena nafte, ali mi već više od desetljeća plaćamo skupu energiju u borbi protiv klimatskih promjena. Prema tome, nama novost nije skupa energija i morate razumjeti da kad vam govori vlada Republike Hrvatske o tome kako je zbog vlade jeftinije gorivo, ne. Zbog prihvaćanja takve službene politike nam je energija skuplja i plaćamo karbonske kredite, odnosno kupujemo karbonska prava i tako već više od desetljeća. Stoga ima mogućnosti da nam energija bude jeftinija, ali u pitanju politika, a ne znanost. Nadam se da ste bili zadovoljni sa današnjom emisijom, sa mojim gostom i uskoro se vidimo u sljedećoj epizodi Slobodni.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijer, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludu. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi?